Hi folks, welcome to Ask the Flower Farmer Live. My name is Dave Dowling. I'm filling in for Lisa Mason Ziegler today because the Gardener's Workshop is having their holiday party. I think it'd be fun to go to the party, but we weren't invited, I guess. I'm sure Lisa and the gang, all the great employees there, they're working in the warehouse and that working on the farm, are having a great time at the party today. Again, my name is Dave Dowling. I'm filling in today for Lisa while she's at their company holiday party today. If you have any questions, you want to put them down on the bottom. You should see a little bubble with a question mark. That's where you put your bubbles, where you'll put your questions in a little bubble that has a question mark in it. And then I'll answer as many as I can. I've got 30 minutes to answer all your questions that you have. As a reminder, Lisa always likes to say, if you've taken one of our classes, comment below in the comment section with a sunflower emoji. Also want to remind people that one of the online classes from the Gardener's Workshop, the one called Grow and Cut Flower Crops in Hoops and Greenhouses, is now an on-demand class, which means if you buy it today, you get the class immediately to start using it. Pretty much all the classes will eventually be on demand. I know my class, bulbs, perennials, woodies, and more, and Lisa's class, the basics, annuals, crops, marketing, and more, are all on demand, which means you buy it today, you get it right away. No more waiting till that once a year registration and the 6-week period when the class is held. So you can buy them and start learning right away and benefit from the information that's in those classes. Today's Wednesday, December 13th. I can't believe it's almost the end of the year. I hope everyone had a decent year, grow and cut flowers this year, and you're looking forward to next year. I always like to remind people to order their plugs for next year by Thanksgiving, which was 3 weeks ago. But if you haven't done it yet, do it soon, and order your seeds soon. Because if you don't order them in advance, sometimes you don't get what you need and what you want, and then you'll be left with the leftovers basically, and that's not always fun because you end up with the wrong colors or the wrong varieties. So again, if you have any questions, put it down the little question mark that's in the bubble at the bottom right of your screen, and I'll go ahead and start answering some questions. This is from Chris. My snaps I harvested are so thin, but all the pictures I see have such fat, beautiful stems. What varieties do you recommend for the fat, full stems? Well, it also depends, are you growing as a single stem or as pinched plants? If you're pinching them, you're going to have a smaller diameter or a skinnier stem than if you grew them as a single stem. And usually if you grow a single stem, you grow it, harvest it, and that's it. You're finished with that plant. That'll give you the highest quality flower and the biggest, thickest stem. And the other thing is spacing. If they're too crowded, they're going to be growing tall to outgrow each other and have weak, thinner stems. So a lot of it is the plant spacing or the amount of space you give for each stem, so to speak. So if you're growing single stem, you usually recommend planting anywhere from 8 to 12 plants per square foot. If you're going to pinch them, you only want to put 4 plants per square foot. So that could be a difference there. And also make sure you're giving some kind of fertilizer to your plants, whether it's an organic fertilizer or starting up with good compost. Nutrition makes a big difference on stem strength. Calcium is an important nutrient for stem strength. So try all that and hope you get better stems in the future. Harvest tracking, what is your strategy? This is from Flax Hollow Farm. What's my tracking for harvesting? I think, are you trying to say, I'm confused, you're trying to know when to harvest or what you have harvested and what's come off of the field. If you're trying to figure out what's coming off the field, the best thing is if you're not using a accounting program like QuickBooks or something similar to run your business, because you can track everything in something like QuickBooks where you enter every bunch you sell, who you sold it to, what you sold it for. Or you can just use a spreadsheet. And spreadsheets, an Excel spreadsheet can do all the math for you, and you put down the day of the week, and under that day you put all the different things you harvested. And you can count up at the end of the year, at the end of the month, how many you harvested by doing the math at the bottom. So use either a spreadsheet or an accounting software program. Any thoughts or recommendation on the width of beds and width of adjacent paths? Yes, definitely have that. That's from Trad. Your width of your beds, you want to make sure they're not too wide to reach into the middle to either harvest, weed, plant, and so forth. Nothing's worse. I've seen people with 4-foot wide beds and they have to step in the bed to either harvest the flowers or plant the flowers, and you don't want to do that. So you wouldn't do a 4-foot bed unless it's something really tall that you're picking on the outer edges of the bed, something like a woody shrub or something like that. I recommend a 30-inch bed, 36 inches at the most, because that way you can reach it from both sides, reach the center. Sometimes you can reach the whole bed from one side on a 30-inch bed. And then for your walkways, it depends. Some people like to keep really narrow walkways, especially in a tunnel or a greenhouse where that's expensive real estate, because you have the expense of the tunnel and the heat and the plastic and everything. And also if you don't have much room, if you're an urban farm or a smaller farm, you can't have a 3-foot walkway because you're going to not have enough room to plant all your crops. So your walkway needs to be big enough for you to walk through it and maintain the plants and harvest, but it also doesn't want to be so wide that you're wasting space. So for me, a walkway, I used to have a walkway between like a 30-inch bed and a 2-foot walkway. If you're growing where you have grass walkways between, you want it wide enough for either a single push mower to go up and back and be finished, or even wide enough for a riding mower. So it all depends on how you're going to work your farm as far as prepping the beds and what you're going to do in the aisles. Some people put down landscape fabric in the aisles so they don't have any weeds in between, and they just have a 3-foot piece of fabric between each bed. So it really depends on how you want to lay out your farm, but I recommend a 30 or 36-inch wide bed. What size lizanthus plugs do you recommend purchasing in zone 4? This is Edith's farm asking that. It doesn't matter what zone you're in. Lizanthus plugs, you don't want to get really small plugs, which is a higher number of plants in the tray. Like one of the growers offers like a 512 plants. I would never do a 512 size plug lizanthus because the soil mass is smaller than the end of your pinky and the plant itself is just so small. I like to do a 120 or a 200 or maybe I think a 275 is about the smallest plant I would go. The biggest thing is when you transplant lizanthus into the bed, you want to make sure you have really good soil you're planting in, which means it's really fine, not big and chunky and rocky, because you want really good soil mass, in other words, that plug, contact between that plug and the soil in the ground, so there's no air spaces. And then you water them really good when you put them in, and then you're going to hand water those lizanthus for 2 to 3 weeks until they're established and rooted in and starting to grow. The worst thing you do is plant lizanthus in chunky, rocky soil that has bad soil contact to the plug. Water them when you put them in and walk away and come back 2 weeks later and wonder why they're not growing. You need to hand water your lizanthus for a couple weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, because they're slow growers, until they're rooted in and the roots are bigger than that little teeny plug that you put in the ground. Flowers of the field in Ontario, up in Canada. What is the shortest dormancy period for a stilbee or others? We have our own bare roots that we can start in the heated greenhouse, but don't want to start too early. I'd have to look that up. Every plant variety has a different dormancy requirement. Like a peony, it needs 40 days of temperatures under 40 degrees. Everything is different. I would have to look that up. Google might have that answer. If you just look up a stilbee vernalization requirement, and it might be in there. Some plants don't need any vernalization. You can grow a delphinium, some of the newer varieties, they don't need to have a cold period. But if you've got the bare root that you're trying to force in the greenhouse earlier, you just need to find the weeks of cold needed, and I don't know this off the top of my head. Google might be the answer for that. I don't see any other unanswered questions right now. So I guess I'll just talk for a minute unless somebody has a question. Again, the online classes the Gardener Workshop offers, almost all of them are now on demand, which means you get them right away. You don't have to wait for that yearly enrollment period or wait for that 6-week period. And I see somebody putting some questions up into the chat. Make sure in the comment section. Make sure you put the questions in the little bubble with the question mark, because sometimes I don't see them in the chat. What are your top woody crops for 8B in the wet areas? If you're wet areas, your best crop is winterberry holly or ilex. It's the red berries. There's also varieties that are kind of an orange or even yellow for earlier sales in the fall, but the red for once you get into the Christmas holiday season. Those are the best ones for damp areas because they don't mind it wet. And also any willows, curly willow and pussy willow will go in a damp area. When I say damp, it shouldn't be swampy where it's always muddy, but just that it stays wet after the rain for a few days where it's always damp, but not muddy where you can't walk through it. That would be more like a swamp. But those are both ones that work great. The important thing to remember with the winterberry holly, there's male and female plants. The females have the berries, but you can have a couple male plants so they can pollinate the females and produce the berries. And they produce the berries on old wood, which means they grow this year. This year's growth will have berries next year. So you gotta be careful how you do your pruning on those. Here, Joe Jefferson, just tipping my toe into flower farming. I've done vegetables for years. What is your recommendation for areas to focus and where to start? Well, if you're just getting started with cut flowers, if you haven't taken Lisa Ziegler's class, The Basics, I highly recommend it because that'll help you get the cut flower business set up right. And she covers all the annual crops, which are the ones that most people will start out with. Things like celosia, sunflowers, zinnias, gomphrena. Those are the easy ones with the lowest input costs because you're basically buying usually seeds or very lower cost plugs and liners. But definitely do that. But most importantly, I always like to say, it's where you're going to sell your flowers is the most important thing to know because you can grow 10 acres of amazing, beautiful flowers, but if you don't know where you're going to sell them, that would be like a restaurant opening up and not having a place to put the food on. You got to know where you're going to sell your flowers, at least an idea, whether you're going to sell at a farmer's market, direct to florist, a stand at the end of your driveway. And if you want to sell at a farmer's market, now is the time to start talking to them about getting into a market for next year. You can't just show up at a market the first week in May and say, hey, I'm here, I want to be in your farmer's market. The farmer's market management has already decided who are the vendors of that market, and you're 6 months late trying to get into the market. But start with the easy annuals. Sunflowers, you never go wrong with those. Zinnias, celosias, things like that. All easy to grow and very easy to sell. If you sell them to florists, they use those all the time. If you sell at farmers markets, they sell well. And they also make great mixed bouquets. Another thing to remember is a lot of what is sold either to florists or used in a farmer's market is not necessarily a flower, but a filler. Things like mountain mint, eucalyptus, other greens and fillers in addition to the flowers. So don't forget to grow some of those. Moonchild Blooms wants to know it's my favorite Baptisia variety. There's so many new ones now that are from proven winners, which are the patented plants. You have to buy them through a distributor or a grower that is licensed to grow the proven winner plants. But I always like Twilight Prairie Blues or any of the Prairie series is some of the proven winner ones. There are all these different shades of much more purple, mauve, pink colors. I don't think there's any bad Baptisia. I say pick the colors that you think your customers want to buy. But I grew the Twilight Prairie Blues. It was unbelievably productive and a great color to sell. Do I have a preferred variety of mock orange or deutzia? Not really. There's not many varieties of each. It's not like you've got so many varieties of hydrangea or lilac. Both of those don't have many varieties, but I don't off the top of my head know the actual variety names to do. Here's a good one. What series of anemones and ranunculus would you field plant or outside plant or plant in crates, but for outdoor growing in zone 6B, Massachusetts? The trick with growing a ranunculus and anemones without growing them in a tunnel is by the time you can get them growing and planted in the spring, they don't always have time to bloom before it gets too hot and they go dormant. So even if you're going to grow them outdoors, I would still try and put a low tunnel over them and get them planted. If you're in zone 6B in Massachusetts, to get them planted out there by early March. under a low tunnel that can be just either remade or plastic, just so you're warming the soil up a little bit. Because you need to get those blooming by the end of April, early May, because by the first or second week of June, it's too hot, and the plant's going to shut down and go dormant. As far as varieties, the ranunculus, the variety called Amandine, is a little bit more heat tolerant. They say they will bloom for about a week or two longer than the Labelle. So you might try those because you're trying to get them to bloom later in the season, planting them outdoors. And the anemones, any of them would work for you. I think you would be better off with the ones that have the shorter stem, which you'd have to look that up to see which ones it is. But you've got Galilee, Jerusalem, Marone. Any of those would work. But you could pick one that has a shorter stem so they're going to bloom quicker and give you flowers sooner in the season. Poplar Creek Farm. I'm in my third year growing and looking to sell to a local florist. Any tips for approaching them? Well, first thing you don't want to do is show up on a Thursday or Friday when they're getting ready for weddings and busy and don't have time for you. You never want to show up the week of Mother's Day or the week of Easter or any busy holiday week. But you definitely want to go in with a complete price list so they know, they can look at you and say, okay, your zinnias are X dollars, they know the price of your sunflowers, what your lisianthus, what your prices are going to be, and take them in a bucket of samples. I used to like to go to a florist when my peonies were blooming because there was peonies, baptisia, sweet william, some other late spring flowers that were amazingly good. Take them a sample bucket with your price list. Let them know these are samples for you to keep. Don't sell them. Don't send them out the door. I want you to keep them so you can see how long they last. Make yourself an arrangement to keep here in the shop or take home for yourself. I want you to see the quality of them. I don't want you to just ship them out the door tomorrow and never know what happened with them. Give them that price list and then let them know what days of the week you deliver to their area, whether it's you deliver every Tuesday, every Wednesday. They want to know when they can count on getting flowers from you. But the most important thing is the price list and some samples of the best flowers you have. Some people like to say, give them a call first to make an appointment. But for me, if you call somebody up, it's too easy for them to say, no, I'm not interested, and hang up, and then they've shut the door on you. If you walk in the front door of a florist with a bucket of flowers and a price list and say, here are some free flowers, it's kind of hard for them not to at least accept the flowers and say thank you, and then you've at least got the flowers in their hands. But the most important thing is having a price list and a variety list of what you're going to have to offer to them. Fiona Vietti. Do we soak romance ranunculus and butterfly ranunculus longer than regular ranunculus? If so, how long? They do say to soak those for up to 12 hours. Again, you want to make sure that the water is flowing or have a bubbler in there so the water doesn't get stagnant. If you look in the Edney ranunculus catalog that's available either on the ballseed.com/cutflowers website or on the edneyflowerbulb.com website, there's a page in the middle of the book with very detailed instructions on how to start both regular ranunculus, and then there's a page on butterfly and romance ranunculus. An important thing with the butterfly and romance is, unlike the other ones that you would soak, plant them, water once, and then walk away from them, the butterfly and romance, you do need to make sure you don't let the soil dry out once they're in the soil. If it dries out, then that's telling the plant, oh, there's a drought, I'm going to go dormant, I'll wait till next year. And that's not what you want to do. You want to make sure you wake them up and get them sprouted and growing. So the romance and butterfly do need a little bit more water when you first plant them. But again, you don't want to overwater them until they're going to rot and be soaking wet, but just the soil needs to stay damp. But check out the catalog. It has the information, a whole page of detailed information for you. Elder and Oak Farm, any tips for approaching florists for the first time? Especially ones that don't buy local. What I just said for the other question, 2 questions before this, take a bucket of the best flowers you have, a price list, let them know when you're coming in their neighborhood to deliver each week, because you have to be able to deliver each week. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be here when I have something ready. You're going to have flowers every week available. And also let them know how you're going to send them an availability each week. Do you want them to look on your website to find it? Do you want to email it to them? How do they want to receive your availability list each week? Cecile, Flower Farm. I planted my anemone last week of October at the high tunnel. Now second week of December, and I'm seeing buds with at least 10 inches long. Is this normal for anemones and high tunnel? Thanks. You don't say what zone you're in. If you're in an area where it's not freezing, they're going to grow and start blooming. The first anemone blooms in each plant always can be a little shorter than what they will be with the second flush of flowers or the next stem. The first flower come up is always short compared to what you have later on. If you're in an area that's not going to freeze, they're going to start blooming now and keep blooming until it gets too hot next spring. If you're in an area that's still going to freeze, what's going to happen? You're going to get a few flowers now. If the cold weather comes in, they're going to stop pushing up flowers. They'll just have the green foliage the rest of the winter. And then in late February, March, they'll start blooming again. If you, this is Shirley Greenhouses. If you can't tell which end is pointed on anemones, does it matter which way you plant them? If you can't tell which is up or down, usually the kind of carrot shape, but sometimes they're almost just kind of flattened. If you can't tell, look for a little teeny belly button on it somewhere. That's usually the top. When I say belly button, you can see where it's a little round circle where the leaves would have grown last year. Try and get that pointing up. If you can't tell, lay it horizontal, and that's usually okay. Even if you get them planted upside down, they'll grow down, turn around, and come back up. But it's better if you either get them pointing the right way or horizontal as opposed to upside down. And if you do notice in 2 or 3 weeks that some are upside down, just gently pull them up, flip them over, and put them back on the ground, and they'll be fine. Here, this is Lisa Testa. I planted 100 peonies this fall. I was so concerned that I would plant too deep, and now I'm worried some are not deep enough. Could I change this? Could it damage the eye? She's in zone 5. So zone 5 gets really cold in the winter, but you're surprised that cold's not going to hurt the peonies. The only things that happen if they're too close to the surface, someone could step on them, but then also they're just not going to be a strong stem because they don't have that support of the soil, inch or two of soil on top. What I would recommend if you think they're not deep enough, add a shovel of dirt over top each one or some compost to make sure they're down underground. Again, you shouldn't see the eye, but if you can see it, it's not going to hurt. But I would try and bury them if they're not deep enough. Again, the cold is not going to hurt them. And no more questions right now, so let's see if there's here in any of the comments. Again, this is middle of December. I'm hoping that everyone's got their farms bundled up for the winter, row cover on things that need row cover. If you've got hydrangeas that need to be pruned back, you can do that anytime now, from now until late February, early March before they sprout in the spring. And by hydrangeas, you would cut back, things like the Limelight, Annabelle, ones that grow on bloom on new wood. You want to prune those back before they start blooming in the spring or start growing in the spring. Here's somebody, Ellie's Waggart. I can't quite know who the name is. It looks like they're New Zealand. I got for free around 20 kilograms of various flower bulbs. The kilograms tells me they probably are in New Zealand. Tulips, daffodils, crocus, anemones, etc. If I plant them now, okay, she's in Central Europe, will I be able to see flowers in April? I do not have we do have a real mild winter. Well, your only option is to go ahead and plant them. If your winter's not being cold enough, they'll grow and just won't bloom well. If there's something that normally is grown in the gardens in your area, they should be fine. We're still mid-December. Even if you have a mild winter, you're still going to have 2.5 to 3 months of winter weather, which even if it's only in the 40 degrees or Celsius, that may be 5 degrees. I'm not sure the conversion. As long as it's close to freezing most of the winter, you should be fine. But the sooner you get them in the ground, the better. Bulbs are much better in the ground than they are in a bag or in a box. Cecile Flower Farm just said, yes, Ellen Frost's course is great. Ellen has 2 courses. One is a short course that is about, I forget the actual title of it, but the longer course, the big course, is Growing Your Business with Local Flower Sourcing. That one's geared toward both the user and the grower. The user would be the retail florist, to encourage your retail florists how and why they should buy local grown flowers. But it's also great for a farmer so they know how to approach the florist and the talking points, so to speak. Her short class is just called Preparing to Sell Florist, preparing to sell to florists. And that would be a great one to take for anybody who's looking to sell flowers to a florist. Because she's, as a florist, has been buying flowers from nothing but local growers for 16 years. It's a long time. And she knows, from the florist point of view, what you as a grower should do. Okay, a couple more questions here. Dal Smith, I have a couple peonies planted in large pots. They still have some foliage on them. They have not bloomed yet. This will be year 3. Do I leave the foliage or prune it? Don't cut the foliage off until it's died from cold weather. 2 things that are important to know are those peonies planted too deep. So in other words, if you were to gently dig down the soil, you shouldn't dig any more than 2 inches to find the new eyes, which would be little pink or red sprouts ready to grow up for next year. They should be no deeper than 2 inches. If it's deeper than that, they won't bloom. Are the peonies in full sun? They do not bloom if they're in shade. If you had 6 or 7 hours of sun, they might bloom, but be scraggly, weak-looking plants. They want to be in full hot sun 12, 14 hours a day. And also growing a pot, make sure you use some kind of fertilizer on them occasionally. It's best to fertilize in the spring before they start growing, and then again in midsummer when they're making the buds and eyes for next year. But if you're coming up to your 3rd season coming up, you should definitely have flowers. If not, I would check the depth and make sure you get enough sun on them. Fuss and Fiddle, Zone 6 in Ohio. Freesia bulbs planted late spring of 2030, I think you mean 2023, late spring this year, never bloomed. Should I store them indoors, unheated garage? I have no greenhouse. They have nice green growth now. See, what freesias do, you didn't say if you're growing them in the ground or in a crate or pots. Freesias are another one of those plants that go dormant when it gets hot. So it's really hard to grow them without having a heated greenhouse to grow them and plant them in November, December, and January for flowers in February, March, and April. Because if you wait till it's warm enough to plant them outdoors in early April, by the time they'll be blooming late June, they've already gone dormant because it's so hot. Unless you're in a really cool, like a zone 3 or somewhere where your nights still get down to the 50s at night, which that's not the way it is in Ohio, maybe somewhere up in Canada. So you say you have some green growth now. The best thing would be to try and grow them somewhere in a place under lights if you don't have a cool but heated greenhouse. By that I mean like in a basement that's chilly, put grow lights over them and grow them like you're growing any other plant under lights, and they'll bloom in about 10 to 12 weeks. But it's really hard to grow freesias without having a heated greenhouse. Even though you only heat it to 45 at night, you really do need a heated greenhouse so you can grow them over the winter when it's not so hot. Manitouk Farm Flowers. I didn't get around to planting all my tulip bulbs. How do I store them to plant them next fall? You don't. If you don't get those tulip bulbs planted this fall, throw them in the trash. They're not going to store and let you plant them again next year. They'll just dry out and go bad. There's no way you can save them to plant next year. Even if you have to go out and take a shovel and break the frost to go through and dig a hole, I would go out and dig them now, because you cannot save tulip bulbs for next year. It just does not work. They'll dry up and you're wasting your time. And Pop the Creek wants to know, where can I find a good price list for Zone 7B? A price list for what? Because here I work for Ball Seed, Ball Horticulture. I can give you a price list for anything. 7B, if you're talking plugs, bulbs, we sell everything but woody shrubs. So I'm not sure what kind of price list you're looking for Zone 7B. But we can give you a price list for pretty much everything. We do have a price list for plugs for both perennials and annuals. That is nothing but cut flowers. If you send me an email at ddowling, DOWLING, at ballhort, HORT.com, I'll send you that price list. Excuse me. See if there's any other. Jeannie wants to know, are there any bulbs that one stores in freezer worth planting? You wouldn't freeze the bulbs before planting. You can chill them before planting. In other words, there's bulbs that people want to grow, but if you're in an area with a mild winter, you can get the bulbs in October, store them in a cooler at about 35 degrees until you can plant them in December when your nights are colder and you've had some frost. But there aren't any bulbs that you're going to store in a freezer. A wholesale bulb supplier will store lily bulbs in a freezer, but it's at 29 degrees and it's real specific cooling needed. So basically they're storing them so they can ship them year round. But a home gardener or a cut flower farmer would not freeze lily bulbs. So there's nothing you would freeze. This is stone circle flowers. I'm thinking of growing calla lilies this year. What is a good growing schedule? Have a succession of them, and she's in zone 6A. Well, callas like a warm start. They like soil about 70 degrees, the same as like when you're starting seeds. Callas start blooming 8 or 9 weeks after planting. So what you should do is schedule multiple shipments to ship to you starting about your last frost date, and then get another shipment every 4 weeks, and plant every 4 weeks, and then you'll have a continuous succession. Because when that first batch starts blooming in 8 weeks, you get about 2 to 3 weeks of flowers out of them, and then the next one will start blooming right after that, and they kind of overlap. You can order a large order and then store the bulbs unplanted in an open box or crate in an area that's about 55 to 60 degrees, and then succession plant them that way. And I think I've got all the questions, and I am out of time. It's 1 o'clock. I'm only supposed to go for 30 minutes. Here's one real quick question. Elder and Oak Farm wants to know, if I don't get to know my cost per stem, should I use the Boston Cut Flower Terminal for Florist? You use that as a guide, because that's, if anybody doesn't know what that is, if you look up Boston Terminal Market pricing, there's a price thing that the USDA puts out every week of prices at the Boston Terminal Market of flowers, the price that florists are paying. And that's just a guide. You should know that yours should always be that price or a little bit higher, because there's no waste with yours. If you buy 10 sunflowers from you, all 10 sunflowers are perfect. If they buy it through the wholesaler, they might get 7 or 8 good ones out of that box. So don't use that as a guide of where to, the limit that you should charge. Use that as a starting point and usually go up from there. So that's my time is up for today. Lisa will be back next week. They're having their Christmas party today at the Gardener's Workshop. And again, our classes are all on demand now, most of them. You buy it today, you get it today. The gardenersworkshop.com is full of lots of other free resources. If you're not following Lisa on the Gardener's Workshop on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, there's always something new there. 2 or 3 times a week she posts videos about what to grow, how to grow it, how to sell it, all kinds of great information. So I don't have any other Ask the Flower Farmer scheduled, but I'm sure I'll be back sometime in the future to cover for Lisa again. Thanks, everybody, and you'll have a great day.